británica. Se lo paso a Mike y él va a moderar esta segunda sesión.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the invitation to be here participating as an official introducer in the conference. It's such a treat not to have to give a paper and be so tense in front of all of my esteemed colleagues here. Our first paper is, as you see, a paper by Christine Hastorf from Berkeley. And it's such a pleasure to have Christine presenting here. We've known each other and go back to, we were just reminiscing, like 1975? 1975 we started working together. I was an undergraduate student here at UBC and had an opportunity to go and work with Christine, who taught me how to make flotation samples. My first introduction to flotation, and it's and ever since we've been in touch, we have had a lot in common over the years. And without further ado, Christine, come on up and present your new work.
Thank you. No, it's not new. Thank you. Yikes, there's lots of stuff up here. Sorry, I think you can all hear me. It seems very loud. Is that okay? Anyway, the slides are in Spanish, but it's just way too much going on. Can I do something with that to make it less aggressive?
Like this.
Yeah, okay. Okay, great. Let's hope that works. Thank you. So thank you very much for the invitation and for your help and for letting me come. It's an honor to be here in this group and to meet many of you and see old friends as well. I'm an anthropological archaeobotanist and thus have a plant focus when thinking about human society. I focus on plants because most of the world's food is plant-based. Some are flavorful, others are filling and satiate, and some have interesting textures. Some we enjoy and some we find distasteful. While every archaeological site does not always have well-preserved archaeobotanical data, we must remind ourselves of the potential ubiquitous presence of botanical material in every site we study and think about. In other words, we must make the invisible visible. To talk about plant foods in Latin America today, I will present some important American indigenous plant evidence, not most of my own work, but of renowned scholars. The regions in which we believe they were domesticated and their spread, to illustrate the engagement of plants and people and the evaluation that these plants receive, but also this interconnectivity and movement across space throughout the two continents of the Americas. It is clear that some plants spread widely throughout the Americas, while others did not move out of their location. Maize and tobacco are examples of very widespread taxa, whereas maca and oyuku from the Andes did not move out of their domestication ranges. Most plants were somewhere in between, traded and accepted, gifted, taken on pilgrimages, and adopted to different climates and day lengths. Lots of words, sorry. We're aware that people have always intensively interacted with the living world around them and gathering off the land and focusing on certain plants that yielded what they wanted while responding to that engagement. What makes certain food resources special, it's not just their caloric yield nor their flavor, but also food abundance temporally and geographically located. In fact, some foods are resonant due to where they are found, grown or eaten, linked to memories of past meals. These plants, who responded so well to harvesting and engagement, requested expanding responsibility and commitment from those who were engaging with them, a mutual care, or in Aymara called uiwai. I love that term, so you get to hear it a lot here. This nurturing altered local environments, clearly, as Charles Clement has named landscape domestication for the Amazonian area. Both Bali and Ingold have pointed out that people have always played their part in the ongoing transformation of the natural world. Periodic localized abundance allowed for larger gatherings, social exchanges, dances, celebrations, feasts, and exchange, making those places significant in stories, myths, and lived experience. And we've seen a lot of examples today of gathering places, these ceremonial centers. Clearly, all of this was going on there. So the social networking and friendship that's created and renewed in these feasts holds a special place in our hearts, just like us eating together here. Everyone looks forward to a feast with friends, and even at times, enemies. It's a time out of normal life, of special preparations and dishes with their anticipations, as well as creating a source for discussion for months afterwards. In the past, as in the present, I propose that plants were one of the most common gifts, along with stories and dances, that these would have moved across whole continents, sometimes remained and continued, and sometimes just that gift, and that was all of the remains of it. Visitors brought gifts, allowing new plants to move across the landscape and selectively get taken up or dropped. In certain locations, this led to a change in mindset about the commitment to tending plants, as we have evidence that span foraging to horticulture to agriculture, and that varied throughout all the continents that we're interested in. One can tend wild plants but not really farm, as do many in the Amazon today. In kitchen gardens, perhaps, but maybe not even that. One can farm with no local indigenous plants, as most do in Europe. And there is anything in between, for example, with most intensive gardening in the kitchen gardens and less intensively fields surrounding the community. The concept of farming could have traveled with the plants, but I doubt that. I think much more likely is that awareness and responsiveness of plants and animals to people existed before any of these were domesticated. Thank you. It's too loud. It still is. It's resonating. Thank you. Hopefully you can better. Thanks. So I think these planting activities and uptake are linked to the valuation of these plants. Foragers recorded by the Amazonian anthropologists manipulate the plants actively throughout their territory, even if they're not domesticated. What is important is that the history of these plants across continents informs us about what people paid attention to, about edibility, flavor, texture, and meaning. The locations of the origins of agriculture are many and diverse, suggesting many paths to domestication and agriculture across the globe over time. It's still ongoing today. We now believe that this was a slow process as it was spread of wild taxa by fauna and climate and people. So this is just a worldwide overview and a little bit sort of a different version of this, focused more on the taxa. And you can see every continent has plants that were domesticated, which means people everywhere engaged with plants and had this intimate interaction. It's not one location spreading. This concept was everywhere. So the taxa are diverse, and we see the variety of trees, geophytes, annuals, and perennials that we're engaged with. Turning to our area, as archaeologists, we can learn a lot about the people we're studying through what they themselves focused on in time and the spread of these taxa. Today, I discuss a few indigenous domesticates of the Western Hemisphere to illustrate the range and timing that these plants were taken up to track their valuations. We know that the locations of early domestication are not the same as the early agricultural locations, informing a very dynamic exchange-scape, if you will. Across the Americas, the speed of adoption was at times fast and at other times slow. And I want to thank Dolores Papirno for this slide. She gave this at a presentation I attended 2 weeks ago, and she shared this with me, so this is not even hot off the press. So in the southern area, we have several trajectories of interest and much new data from the past 20 years of research. Macrobotanical, microbotanical remains such as starch phytoliths, pollen, and importantly, molecular markers and genetic botanical data are clearly giving us more information. And no one has moved this forward more than Dolores Papirno, who created this slide. It's a lot to take in. Here's another one with a lot to take in. So here is just a list that I could fit on one screen of taxa that we still enjoy that were domesticated in South America. Back to this one. So I want to focus on several of the more renowned locations of primary domestication that exist in the Western Hemisphere that represent very different climatic regimes and also had different histories, and yet they were important. These are the low Western Mountains region of Mexico, where several plants were domesticated. We'll be visiting that first. The northwest part of the Amazon basin, where a range of tuberose plants, trees, annuals were domesticated, and the high plateau, altiplano, of the Titicaca Basin, where another range of tubers, chenopods and camelids, were domesticated. So we'll start first with his favorite plant in the whole wide world. Maybe not, I could be wrong. In Central America, most domestication evidence has been linked to the western intermontane mountainous regions in the state of Guerrero. Recent research demonstrates that jicama, cotton, chili peppers, maize, and beans were most likely domesticated in around this greater region. Maize is so important and its history has been so fascinating that I'd like to begin with this food plant, even though I know Mike Blake has probably told you all much more about it than I will mention here today. After John Dobley discovered that the progenitor resided in the Rio Balsas, area of Mexico, a region of deciduous seasonal forested mountains, lakes, and valleys, a research team set out to search for early maize evidence and its associated farming practices. Fortunately, maize macro and micro remains are quite diagnostic, as Dolores is very happy to tell you all. Both starch, grain, and phytolith data were identified by her of the Smithsonian Institute from the, and I can't pronounce this, so you're going to have to help me, the Xihuatotzla rock shelter in the central Balsas area around almost 9,000 years ago. Many investigations inform us that may have been domesticated and spread by mobile hunter and gatherers thousands of years before it became a staple. And I think the data is pretty clear that that's the case. In fact, it even moved down into South America and back up. It just kept moving. It became probably one of the most important gifts across this very large region that we're focusing on today. So there were clearly small groups that were living and engaging with the plants here. And here are some of her data. Starch grain analysis. She got this material off of groundstone and chipstone from 21 different samples, sediment samples as well. So a range of data that shows there's Zea maize, not just teosinte, present there. So we have very, very lovely early evidence there. We also have later evidence of maize, of kernels. And this is all this very, very early date. I just like this picture. We know that maize is flexible. It's probably the par excellence flexible plant and changed as it moved north and south and back again. Via microfossil evidence, we know that maize was in tropical South America by 5,500 years ago. Looking at plots of maize evidence over time and space, we can see a rapid movement of maize. And again, this is just data that I extracted from the literature, so I'm sure there's more points, and I just haven't done it. So we'll just start here, and then here, and then here, and then here. So you can see how, at least where the archaeological work has been done, it moved quite rapidly north and south. So I'd like to turn now to chili pepper, one of my favorites. It was domesticated multiple times and places, so it's very different than maize in the sense of human engagement across this larger landscape. Capsicum annuum, and we currently believe frutescens were domesticated in Mesoamerica, with 3 species developed to the south. And so I tried to sort of roughly put these locations where we think was sort of the next, the general region. They should be all clouds, but then you wouldn't see it as clearly. And this is just fun to look at. These peppers were domesticated in different environmental conditions suggesting great curiosity with these flavorful fruits. I've had the honor to work on some early evidence in South America and also more recently in Mesoamerica, on Mesoamerican material. This particular project began when Tom Dillahay invited me to investigate the early material, capsicum material from Huaca Prieta, a site on the Peruvian coast. It's a site with very early evidence for this plant, although it's not its homeland. To be able to discuss if these species, if there were species in Peru, and what the species were, the different taxa, we first looked at seeds of these modern taxa and something about them and tried to figure out their diagnostic characteristics. And we ended up, after measuring 28 attributes, we ended up with these 8 characteristics. Not to get too complicated, but here's some discriminant analysis to show you how they separated out. So that helped us get a sense of the difference of these different taxa. This is easier to look at. So of these, we confirmed, and you can see here, this is again the Huaca Prieta data along the bottom, our drawings along the top of sort of general characteristics, and then the seeds in the middle. And we had no annuum in Huaca Prieta material, which fits because it's a Mesoamerican taxon. So unlike maize, it didn't get to South America, which there's many things we could talk about why that is. So again, a little more data for you. Katie Chu and I had worked on this together, and she's moving this forward, continuing on with this research. But here at this data, what I really want you to notice is it's early to late in the sequences with the dates along the bottom. And what you see here is that all 4 taxa of the South American sphere, frutescens, chinense, bacotum, and pubescens, are present early on at this site. All 4 of them, which means, remember, they're coming from the Caribbean coast and the Amazon basin, and they're just moving all around, and they're being traded. And again, I'm back to my gifting idea. They're being brought, not necessarily a person from that area, but passing down with the curiosity engagement of that. Whereas by the time people are really settling on the landscape, 4,500, 4,300, these folks are now farming, and they're focusing in on their local taxon. So I sort of see gifting here with farming to the right. Okay, this is what I was talking about yesterday to somebody. So you can take a look at this. This hasn't been published yet. It says 2023, but it's probably not going to be out by then. But at any rate, we've had a series of years of work with Mexican colleagues, and those are Araceli Aguilar, Andres Lira Noriega, Emiliano Gallaga, and of course Kathy Chu and myself. And we've managed, thanks to people in the room, get examples of archaeological specimens and date most of them and able to place them. So you can see that there is a diversity also going on in this area, but it's primarily annuum and frutescens. The South American taxa do not seem to be coming up, at least in these in the pre-colonial times. We also worked a lot with the glaberulosculum, which is the wild taxon, to try and figure out where it is growing, where it could grow, I should say, in the past with ecological models, and therefore where people would be engaging with the glaberulosculum to get a sense of where the annuum would be domesticated, and you'll have to wait for that data. The point is that both North and South America, even though we have these separate domestications, clearly engage very intensively with this plant. And as you know, it is not a staple food, even though some people may eat a lot of it, but that almost everybody in these areas seem to want to join in on the chispa de la vida of the pungent taste, except North America, which is a story that still needs to be investigated. And finally, I'd like to talk about my beloved quinopods, Chenopodium. Like capsicum, this weedy pseudo-cereal was independently domesticated in at least 3 locations across the Americas. And again, like that previous slide of the capsicum, I'm sort of showing you roughly where we think these were engaged more intensively to create the domesticates. So we have the hilly forests of southeastern North America, the mountains of Mexico, where the Natali variety was, and then, of course, the Chenopodium quinoa of the Altiplano. So I'd like to turn now and focus in on the Altiplano research. That this seed did undergo, this plant and seed underwent a morphological change before 2000 BCE. Maria Bruno has spearheaded this research most intensively and has been tracing this process quite closely. These seeds were part of a larger cuisine with a range of Andean tubers, and I just give you a little taste there in the corner of those taxa together, along with local fish and birds, and of course, the indigenous camelids. The cool, dry climate of this region limits cultivation of many plants, but these taxa, these tubers and chenopods, jumped on the bandwagon and were engaged with very intensively, as they still are today. So there's a range of attributes that was used to study this domestication sequence, building upon previous seed morphology research from a series of people. But you can see here various attributes and sort of typologies that we have organized. There are 5 taxa present in the region today and in the archaeological record. And you see them drawn here with an additional example of what we spend our lives looking at, burnt plant remains. There are 2 domestic taxa, Chenopodium quinoa, we call it large and small, and they're identified here with those arrows. And the Paliacauli, which is called Kanyawa, and that is a different species than the chenopod, than the quinoa that you all know and that you get in your stores today. So it's, the quinoa has gone global, but the Paliacauli, the Kanyawa, has not. It's remained in the highland regions. So again, people have values and they have opinions, and some things spread and some things do not. And that is what we want to study. And then we have this wild taxa, the Ambrozoides called Pico, and then the Chenopodium nigra. And those both are wild and continue to be wild, and yet in the region I work, in the Titicaca Basin, they're still collected and consumed, collected in the autumn, stored and eaten, but not planted and not, so they're nurtured but not managed in the intensive sense of domestication. So getting back to these 5 attributes that have been studied, they provide a qualitative and quantitative series of attributes, and they include seed diameter, beak prominence, testa texture, testa thickness, and margin configuration. The testa is the covering of the seed or the seed coat, and this feature actually has 2 layers, very thin inner epidermis that does not vary in size with domestication, and the outer epidermis or testa, which appears to vary in thickness with domestication and can even be absent in some domesticated species. Wilson and Smith found that the thicker testa was a diagnostic feature of both Eastern, North America, and Mexican domesticated chenopods. They associate this development with more competition in seedbed germination, as a thinner testa germinates more rapidly, as you might imagine. In Eastern North America, the cultigen Chenopodium berlanderii subspecies jonesianum has a thin testa ranging between 0 and 20 microns. Gordon also found that the Mexican domesticate has a thin testa ranging from 0 to 20 microns. In modern and archaeological specimens of the Andean domesticate, we have found that the seed coat can be absent or very thin, that is less than 5 microns. Thus, a thin testa alone does not necessarily indicate a domesticated species today. So many have found that adding the beak or beak prominence that you sort of see illustrated in the SEM photo, which is the embryo radicle as it wraps around the endosperm, has become very important in identifying these different subspecies. Gordon recently demonstrated how important beak prominence can be in analyzing the wild domestic spectrum of chenopod's. Gramelian points out that weak or non-existent beaks often correlate with wild or weedy chenopodium in the eastern North America. Whereas back in the Andes, in the highlands, the testa thickness gives us a quick sense of this domestication process, where you can see how the thin testa seeds increase in number over time throughout the sort of the Neolithic, if you will, the people when they're have landed on the landscape and start farming. We can see how the thin testa really grows in time. What we've learned is that over the formative times, spanning over 1,000 years, once village life began, domesticates increased in the archaeological population, suggesting a more intensive horticultural focus as these annuals came into cultivation. Here we see 4 modern taxa plotted with the formative archaeological samples noted by triangles. You have to look on the right side over there for those triangles. The red circles surround the modern domestic quinoa, so they're in the lower part of this diagram, and the purple circles enclose the modern harvested wild seeds. Significantly, none of the archaeological specimens are an exact match with the modern wild or domesticated specimens, as you would expect that to be the case. But we can see more larger seeds and thinner testa in the archaeological samples. These data aid in tracking the continuous process of quinoa domestication that is ongoing today as well. Over time, many wanted to add these foods into their cuisine, but nothing like maize across the rest of the lowland Americas. They require different conditions to grow and have over the years been kept at the agricultural margins until quite recently, being well adapted to many unusual circumstances like high saline conditions. They're going to take off as the world overproduces and more landscape is saline. Chenopods are going to become more important because they much more, say, than tubers can grow in those locations. So it's little surprise that they are having an expansive moment right now, and especially as the world focuses on plant protein. So given that people have manipulated their encountered plants ever since people have resided in the Americas, what do these movements of plants tell us about societal change, identity, and valuation? This intimate relationship is complex, as some taxa are broadly distributed across the continents as they were brought into the family's gardens and cuisines, while others remained local crops, and some even went extinct. These relationships of identity existed because many people believe that plants are sentient beings and capable of feelings and thoughts. Therefore, to tend and to use a plant that then is consumed or made into a tool implies a mutual relationship of nurturing, of uiwai. Plants are common gifts, allowing many to experience them and decide if they're valued enough to continue engaging with them. And this, I think, we see with the plants that are flexible enough to live in different zones, but also are taken up around the region. Plants were agents working with people and other animals to spread their species more broadly. Many wild taxa continue to be important for thousands of years, it is remarkable to realize how many plants the American residents domesticated and how complex their spread was throughout the continents. And again, I remind you of that long list I showed you of just some South American taxa. In the end, some plants that were domesticated very far in the south ended up being propagated in Canada in the north. Other domesticates lost their value and went extinct. Other plants kept being selected and continued to diversify. Still others stayed local. These actions were based on both the characteristics of the plants themselves, but also this valuation that I speak of people wanting to engage with these plants. Some plants moved quickly across the continent and some moved slowly. Squash, beans, and chili peppers are crop plants that were brought under cultivation and domesticated in both Meso and South America a long time ago, 10 to 7,000 years ago, and spread throughout both continents about the same time as agriculture emerged in the Fertile Crescent. Other taxa remained on their continents, still others did not depart from their original habitats. So all of these wonderful plants and their existence through time speak to us about the value that the ancestors gave to these plants, not to mention the life-giving sustenance they continue to give to us. While other continents have produced exciting cuisines, the American taxa that have moved north and south have created a range of rich cuisines here as well. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Christine, for a really wonderful talk. I was curious about this idea of gifts, plants as gifts, and if you could share any of your conversations with communities you work with in the Altiplano, if there are sort of common themes and how people talk about the plants that they use and these very close-knit and very embedded relationships. And I don't know if you have anything that stands out in your memory for how those kind of conversations have emerged organically.
Well, there's two things I could say about that. Many times have I discussed plants with the people in the Altiplano, and they do see them as neighbors and sentient beings, there's no doubt. And they do see their food as being sort of gifted to them from the earth and their ancestors who own the earth. But the reason why I'm really pushing about gifting is kind of to talk about the energy of moving these plants, especially so early, because we have a lot of the maize moves really early, and these chili peppers move early. How they're moving early, even before sort of agriculture, is everybody's, we think everybody's sort of bought into that. And I just think that, especially because of the people that I've engaged with and the ethnographies I've read in the Amazon particularly, people when they go to visit, whether it's going to an event or going to visit relations or neighbors, they always bring a gift, some gift, and from people talking, they usually bring food or plants. And so it seemed to me that was a pretty logical reason why many of these taxa, say chili peppers, why Amazonian chili peppers could get to the coast so very early and move around so much. And the more we have evidence of this, of course, it's very patchy, our evidence. The more we have evidence, the more we'll be able to see that. So I saw that as, we like to give gifts. I mean, I gave gifts to some of you today. And I just think that that's probably a major reason why why some of these taxa move so quickly, so broadly. And people still today in the Altiplano give gifts. And sometimes it's plants and sometimes it's food.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to offer a thought. So I like the idea of giving gifts. I think it's widespread across a lot of cultures. But I also know that food preferences are also strong in some peoples. So I guess an example is you'll see people carrying around little keychain bottles of sriracha. So people have strong opinions about how they season their food. So perhaps it's not just people giving gifts, but maybe also trying to share the flavors that they enjoy.
Yes, that too. I mean, the thing is, to have the plant move across the landscape, you can give the plant or you can give the seeds. And I think if we had every site and all the archaeobotanical data across the Americas, someday maybe, we will find that it's not everywhere, that not everybody takes it up. In fact, that's what we were talking about yesterday, how it doesn't move into the, across the, I don't know what, the Durango border. It doesn't move into North America, the chili pepper chispa. It doesn't. I mean, maize does, beans do, but not chili pepper. So it's not for everybody. And so that's one thing. The more evidence we have, we can kind of plot the tempo of it moving and kind of who takes it up and who doesn't. And I wouldn't be surprised if one community takes it up and the community next to it doesn't, because a lot of times people like to separate themselves by their flavorscape in their foods.
Hello. Thank you so much for your talk. It was wonderful to hear all of the different examples and the things you're getting us to think through and think about. I have one question about the one slide that you had, the different time periods. I can't remember which specimen
The
it was.
Mesoamerican?
Oh, I think so. It was
Different time
phase
periods.
2, phase 3. It was like
Oh,
with a
the
graphic.
graphs, bar
Yes,
graphs?
Yes.
This? No, not this
that
one.
The one before. Sorry. Yes, this one.
Oh, wait, sorry, this one. Sorry, yeah,
Yeah,
that's published, by the way, yes.
Okay, yeah, and you were mentioning that in the earlier phase, we see the presence of the 4 species, and then afterwards, we start to see, obviously, one being privileged, I guess, for lack of a better word. I was wondering, is this possibly another demonstration, not just of domestication, but perhaps preference?
Oh, yes. Well,
Yeah.
and bacatum is the green. And
Okay.
this is the one that's local.
Okay.
That's from sort of the western coast, if you will, of South America. It's the local domesticate that takes off. So it could be we're seeing a selection over, what are we talking, 2,000-3,000 years.
And then I was, guess, just to kind of, I was just wondering about it, but do you think it's possibly at all influenced by farm or domestication, farming practices? Is one easier than the other, or are they pretty much uniform? And then is
You
this
mean
now illustrating
these taxa?
Yeah, or is this now illustrating preference?
How
in
many
terms of
people grow
taste?
chili peppers in their house? I think they're very similar in terms of what they want and need. And it's many people to this day grow them in what we call house gardens or kitchen gardens if they're growing them their own. And my dear colleague, Araceli Aguilar, is an ethnobotanist in Mexico and has worked with many, many growers of the annuum and frutet, all whatever is grown there. And and there's many varieties. So it's not just, we're talking kind of gross categories here, but people are still selecting their own flavor, their own special flavor. So you could go into a community and have several different varieties today of the capsicum in Mexico, especially, and the women gardeners, these home gardeners, home kitchen gardens, shall I say. Clearly, people select even multiple varieties. So they're pretty easy to grow, but they also continue to manipulate them to have their own unique flavors.
Yeah, it's amazing data. Thank you.